Florida looks like a promise. Sun-bleached highways stretching flat toward the horizon. Spanish moss draped over state roads like something half asleep. Strip mall parking lots going amber in the late afternoon. Forest ATV trails vanishing into scrub pine that closes behind you like a curtain. Places you've driven past 100 times. But a lot of people drove into Florida and never drove out. 10 people. 10 different corners of the Sunshine State. None of them came home. Pull up a map, lock your doors. Let's get into it. If you're new here, subscribe. New cases drop every week. February 9th, 1989. Gainesville, Florida. It's a Thursday afternoon, and the University of Florida campus is doing what it always does in the late winter. Carrying on. Classes, coffee, foot traffic between buildings. The residential streets just southwest of campus are quiet in that particular college town way, the kind of quiet that feels safe because it's familiar. Tree-lined blocks, open sidewalks, houses converted to student rentals sitting close together, their front yards gone a little patchy in the Florida heat. Tiffany Sessions is 20 years old. She's a business student, originally from Tampa, and everyone who knows her calls her Tiffy. She's fit, health conscious, the kind of person who keeps a routine and sticks to it. She has the kind of life that, from the outside, reads as entirely normal. A dorm-style apartment on Southwest 35th Place. A roommate, a schedule, a future. She's not the kind of person stories get written about. Not yet. Sometime between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, Tiffany tells her roommate she's heading out for a power walk. This is not unusual. She's done it before. She knows the route. She leaves her wallet on the counter, her keys on the hook, her identification in the apartment. She's only going for a walk. She'll be back before dinner. She puts on a two-tone Rolex. She picks up a black Sony Walkman, and she walks out the door. Here's the first thing that matters. She left her identification. She left her keys. She left her wallet. Those aren't the choices of someone who plans to go far or go long or not come back. Those are the choices of someone who expects to be home in an hour. She was wearing a white pullover sweatshirt, Aspen printed across the collar, red sweatpants, and tennis shoes. The Walkman was plugged into her ears. If you've ever walked alone at dusk with headphones in, you know what that means for your awareness of the world around you. The music fills the space. You stop hearing what's behind you. The route from her apartment building out to the nearby streets and back is the kind of walk you could do in your sleep. A grid of residential roads, open and flat, with the visibility that comes from living in a city built on former swampland. Nothing should go wrong on a walk like this. There's nowhere to hide, really. It's just a neighborhood. And that's the last confirmed time anyone saw Tiffany Sessions leave her apartment building on Southwest 35th Place. By 9 o'clock that evening, 5 hours later, her roommate hadn't heard from her. No call, no knock at the door. Tiffany's wallet was still on the counter. Her keys were still on the hook. The roommate called Tiffany's mother, Hillary, in Tampa. And everything that happened next happened fast. This is where it stops being normal. The Gainesville Police Department was contacted that night. The search that followed would eventually grow into something that the FBI would later describe as the largest missing person search in the history of Florida. 10,000 tips would pour in over the following years. Tiffany's face would appear on flyers, in newspapers, on the walls of post offices across the state. Her mother, Hillary, would spend the next years, and then the next decade, advocating, searching, writing a book about her daughter called Where's My Tiffany? The family offered a $25,000 reward for any information that could lead investigators to Tiffany or to whoever was responsible for her disappearance. As of today, that reward has never been collected. Now this is where the case turns dark. In 2013, 24 years after Tiffany vanished, detectives made a quiet, devastating discovery. A man named Paul Eugene Rolls, a convicted serial killer who had been imprisoned for the murders of other women, had kept an address book. Inside that address book, investigators found a notation. Number 2, February 9th, 89. February 9th, 1989. The exact date Tiffany Sessions disappeared. Investigators believe that notation identifies her as Rolls' second victim. Here's what makes it worse. At the time Tiffany disappeared, Rolls was working a construction job near the path she would have taken on her walk. He didn't show up for work that day. His address book also listed Linda Fida, a known victim he murdered. And what investigators believe is a reference to Elizabeth Foster, another confirmed victim, whose body was found approximately 1 mile from where Tiffany was last seen. The pattern is there. The proximity is there. But here's what doesn't make sense, or rather, what makes the case so agonizing. Rolls never confessed to Tiffany's disappearance. He died in February 2013, 1 month after detectives discovered the address book and conducted interviews with him. He took whatever he knew to his grave. No remains have ever been found. Tiffany has been cross-referenced against 150 unidentified decedents across the United States and excluded from all of them. She has simply never been located. A second name surfaces in the case file: Michael Christopher Knickerbocker, who at the time of his own imprisonment for unrelated crimes reportedly told fellow inmates that he had murdered Tiffany Sessions, that he had chained her to a tree and disposed of her body near the Caloosahatchee River in Fort Myers. But here's the problem with that claim. Knickerbocker was not living in Gainesville at the time Tiffany disappeared. His location data at the time contradicts his story. Investigators considered the claim, but the feasibility has been questioned consistently. It is, as of the public record, disputed. What investigators believe, and this is belief, not confirmation, not a conviction, not a body, is that Tiffany was likely abducted by Paul Eugene Rolls, either on the street or during a brief interaction with a vehicle she may not have heard approaching. The Walkman in her ears, the quiet neighborhood, the short distance between where she started and where she was supposed to end up. There are eyewitness accounts, reported though unconfirmed, of a woman matching Tiffany's description, speaking with the occupants of a vehicle in the area that evening. Whether she entered that vehicle is unknown. It has never been confirmed. The accounts are on record, but they haven't been enough to close the case or definitively place her anywhere after she walked away from her apartment building. She vanished on a residential street, not a remote trail, not a dark parking garage. A street in a college town in the late afternoon, in a neighborhood she knew. She left her wallet and her keys and her identification because she was coming back. She never came back. Her apartment sat exactly as she left it. Wallet on the counter, keys on the hook. Door unlocked from the inside. The kind of stillness that settles in when someone steps out and the world just stops. Tiffany Sessions has been missing for over 35 years. The FBI still considers hers the largest search in Florida's history. Her case remains open. Her family is still looking for answers. And Paul Eugene Rolls, the man investigators believe is responsible, never had to answer for it. At least with Tiffany. There's a name, a suspect, however unproven, however permanently silent. The next case gives us 50 years of searching. 50 years of a mother tracking bikers across the country, hiring private investigators, traveling to England, sitting by a phone that rang with nothing but cruelty. 50 years, and not a single confirmed answer. Amy Billig's camera turned up 250 miles from home. That detail will matter. Hold on to it. But first, Coconut Grove, Miami, March 5th, 1974. Picture it the way it actually was, not the way Miami looks now. The Grove in the early 70s was something specific. A subtropical counterculture enclave. Bayside and loose, full of art galleries, street vendors, Hare Krishnas in Peacock Park, and a general feeling that the rules of the rest of America didn't quite apply here. People moved slowly. Doors stayed open. Teenagers hitchhiked through their own neighborhoods because that was just how you got around. And nothing bad had happened yet. And you were 17 and the sun was out and your father's gallery was less than a mile away. Amy Billig was 17 years old. Brown hair, brown eyes, 5'5", 110 pounds. She trained dolphins at the Miami Seaquarium. She was weeks away from graduating from the Adelphi Academy of Coral Gables. March 31st was the date. And she was already thinking about acting. Her family had moved to the Grove from New York City in 1969, drawn by the community, her father Nathaniel's art gallery on Commodore Plaza, the warmth of the place. She had a younger brother named Joshua. Her mother, Susan, described her as beautiful in a way she hadn't fully realized yet. On the afternoon of March 5th, Amy came home from school, ate a yogurt, and called her father to ask if she could borrow $2. She wanted to meet some friends for lunch at Peacock Park later, and she needed the money first. Nathaniel said yes. Amy changed her blouse, put on a denim miniskirt and cork platform sandals, and stepped outside to hitchhike the mile to her father's gallery on Commodore Plaza. She was seen by construction workers at the corner of Poinciana Street and Main Highway, thumb out, waiting for a ride. She never arrived at her father's gallery. By evening, when Amy hadn't come home and hadn't called, Susan and Joshua began to worry. By the next day, it was clear something was wrong. Police were contacted. The search began. Here's the critical detail, and it's one that gets lost in the larger chaos of what followed. 2 weeks after Amy disappeared, a college student hitchhiking near the Florida Turnpike found a camera in the grass. The location, near the Wildwood exit. That's approximately 250 miles northwest of Coconut Grove. The film inside was developed. There was one photograph on the roll, a single, overexposed image of a light-colored pickup truck parked in front of a light-colored wall with a vine growing up it. Investigators spent years trying to identify that truck. That wall, neither was ever found. Think about what that means geographically. Amy was walking a mile through her own neighborhood. Her camera, which she apparently had with her that afternoon, ended up 250 miles away, near a turnpike exit in a ditch. Someone carried it there, or she was transported there, rapidly in a vehicle, heading north. Both possibilities are disturbing in different ways. Now this is where the case turns dark. March 5th, 1974 was not an ordinary Tuesday in Coconut Grove. That same afternoon, motorcycle clubs were passing through the neighborhood en route to Daytona Beach for Bike Week, the annual gathering that draws thousands of riders up the Florida coast. Two of those clubs, the Outlaws and the Pagans, were both documented as traveling through the Grove area that day. Both were known to law enforcement as organizations with histories of violence, trafficking, and the exploitation of women. Within days of Amy's disappearance, tips began coming in placing her with biker gang members. Multiple callers, separately, described a teenage girl being taken. The Pagan Motorcycle Club became the dominant focus of investigative attention. Detectives came to believe, and this is belief, not proof, not a charge, not a conviction, that Amy was picked up by members of the Pagans, trafficked, and killed. Her body, if that theory is correct, has never been recovered. But here's what doesn't make sense. Every time that theory seemed close to being confirmed, it collapsed. In the earliest days, the investigation was thrown into chaos by a ransom call. Two 16-year-old twins, Charles and Larry Glasser, contacted Amy's parents claiming they had kidnapped her and demanding $30,000 for her return. Police quickly established it was a hoax. The boys were arrested for extortion, but the damage was done. Precious early days of investigation were spent chasing a lie, and by the time investigators refocused on real leads, the trail had already gone cold in ways it never fully recovered from. Susan Billig did not stop. For 31 years, from 1974 until her death in 2005, she searched for her daughter personally. She tracked biker gangs across the country. She traveled to England following a reported sighting. She met with psychics, private investigators, drugs dealers, former gang members, anyone who claimed to have information. She put her own life in danger, repeatedly, entering spaces that law enforcement wouldn't go, because she had nothing left to lose, and her daughter was somewhere. In 1996, it looked briefly like the case might break open. A woman came forward claiming that her husband, a member of the Pagan Motorcycle Club, had made a deathbed confession. According to the woman, Amy had been drugged, assaulted, and ultimately killed by gang members on the day she disappeared. Detectives pursued it, and then they discovered that the woman had been paid by a television production company to give the story on camera. Investigators and Susan Billig herself concluded the confession was fabricated for payment. Another door closed. For 20 years, from the mid-1970s through 1995, Susan also endured something almost incomprehensible alongside the grief of her missing daughter. A man called her regularly, sometimes from payphones, sometimes from locations she couldn't trace. He claimed he was holding Amy. He described in graphic detail things he said were being done to her. He called it cruelty. He called it information. He called it for 2 decades. In 1995, he used a cell phone. FBI agents traced the call to a man named Henry Johnson Blair, a United States Customs Department employee who had worked on Amy's case. He was convicted in 1996 of stalking, sentenced to 2 years in prison, and lost a civil lawsuit to Susan Billig for $5 million. He claimed his obsessive-compulsive disorder and alcoholism were responsible. He claimed he never knew Amy. He is considered a person of interest in her disappearance, not charged, not convicted of anything connected to her case. But there is a detail investigators have noted. In one photograph of Amy taken around the time of her disappearance, a white van appears in the background. It matches in color and model a van Henry Blair owned in 1974. He died before anyone could fully answer that question. Nathaniel Billig died in 1992 from lung cancer. Susan died in 2005, the same disease, still without answers, though she had asked her son Joshua to never stop looking. Before she died, she had Amy's name etched into the family gravestone at Graceland Memorial Park North. Amy, January 9th, 1957, March 5th, 1974. A date of disappearance standing in for a date of death, because there was nothing else to put. Joshua built a remembrance bench for his sister in Peacock Park, the park where she was going to meet her friends for lunch that day. The lunch she never made it to, because she never made it 1 mile down the road from her own front door. 50 years. No body. No confirmed perpetrator. No closure. Just a camera in a ditch off the Florida Turnpike and a photograph of a truck that no one ever identified. Amy's family could search. They had a direction to look, names to pursue, a theory to chase even if it kept collapsing. The next case doesn't give a family that much. In the next case, 2 men vanish in the same county on the same stretch of road. 3 months apart. And the last person to see both of them alive is a sheriff's deputy who was never charged with a crime. Before we get into what happened in Naples, there's a detail you need to hold in your mind the entire time you're reading this. Not a theory. A fact. 2 men vanished. Same county, same road corridor. 3 months apart. The last confirmed person to see both of them, the last person either man was documented to be with, was the same Collier County Sheriff's deputy. That deputy was never criminally charged. He is alive today, living in Iowa. Keep that in your head as we go back to the beginning. October 14th, 2003. Immokalee Road, North Naples, Florida. It's a Monday morning, and Felipe Santos is driving. He's 23 years old, an undocumented Mexican national who came to the United States at 19 with a specific and ordinary kind of dream. Make money, build something, start a family. He'd settled in Immokalee, a small agricultural community inland from Naples, populated heavily by migrant farm workers. He spoke limited English. He worked. He sent money home. He was the kind of person who doesn't make headlines, which would later turn out to matter enormously. At some point that morning, Felipe is involved in a minor traffic incident on Immokalee Road. The details of the crash itself are not the point. It was minor, a fender situation, the kind of thing that gets sorted out on the roadside in 20 minutes. What matters is who showed up. Deputy Stephen Calkins of the Collier County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene. He found Felipe Santos, a young man without a valid driver's license, without documentation, in a state that was not his home. Calkins placed Felipe in the back of his patrol car. No arrest was logged with dispatch. No record was created in real time of what Calkins intended to do with him or where they were going. Calkins later told investigators he drove Felipe to a Circle K convenience store and dropped him off. No one at that Circle K ever confirmed seeing Felipe Santos. No surveillance footage placed him there. No witness reported a young Mexican man being dropped off by a patrol car at any gas station in the area that morning. Felipe Santos was never seen again. His family in Mexico waited. Calls went unanswered. The community in Immokalee noticed he was gone. But here's the critical detail that shapes everything that follows. Because Felipe was undocumented, because he was a migrant worker in a farm community, because he had no fixed paper trail and limited institutional connections in the United States, the machinery that should have searched for him did not move quickly. The case drew almost no media attention. The investigation proceeded slowly, and then it stalled. For 3 months, it stalled. This is where it stops being a single tragedy and becomes something else entirely. January 12th, 2004, North Naples, Florida. Same county, same road corridor. Terrance Williams is 27 years old. He's a black man originally from Tennessee, and that morning he told his mother something simple and ordinary. "I'll see you later, Mama." His roommate, Jason Gonzalez, watched him climb into his white 1983 Cadillac and drive away to meet co-workers at a party that evening. Somewhere on or near 111th Avenue North and Vanderbilt Drive, just a few miles from where Felipe Santos was last seen 3 months earlier, Terrance Williams encountered Deputy Stephen Calkins. Calkins pulled him over for driving without a license. Again, no arrest was logged with dispatch in real time. Again, Calkins placed the man in his patrol car. Again, Calkins would later claim he dropped him off, this time at a different location, a gas station, the exact specifics shifting across multiple tellings of the story. Here's what doesn't make sense. Calkins did not file a report about the Williams traffic stop for a full week. 7 days passed before he put anything on paper. When he did file, he noted seeing the white Cadillac around 12:15 in the afternoon. But investigators who later built a minute-by-minute timeline from phone records, dispatch logs, and interview transcripts concluded that Calkins' reported time was probably not accurate. Possibly not even close. Terrance Williams was never seen again. His white Cadillac was found. He was not in it. Marcia Williams, Terrance's mother, began making calls immediately. She contacted the sheriff's office. She contacted anyone who would listen. She and family members drove the area themselves, looking. About 2 months after Terrance vanished, Marcia wrote a letter to the editor of the Naples Daily News, a public plea for help finding her son. She received a call in response to that letter. She thought it might be news about Terrance. It wasn't. It was the Mexican consulate, calling to tell her about a young man named Felipe Santos, who had disappeared from the same area 3 months before her son, and who had last been seen in the same deputy's patrol car. 2 families, 2 men, same road, same deputy, same story, dropped off at a convenience store that no one could confirm. Now this is where the case turns dark. The Collier County Sheriff's Office had investigated Calkins in connection with the Santos disappearance. That investigation concluded in December 2003, 41 days before Terrance Williams vanished. Calkins was exonerated. He was returned to active patrol duty. And then, 41 days after being cleared, he pulled over Terrance Williams on the same North Naples corridor, and Terrance was never seen again. Calkins' personnel file, later obtained through records requests, told a story investigators found deeply unsettling. In 2001, roughly 14 years into his law enforcement career, Calkins had largely stopped making formal arrests. He kept patrolling. He kept responding to calls. But arrests, the documented kind that generate paperwork and chain of custody and accountability, had essentially ceased. What he was doing during the traffic stops he wasn't logging is not known. It is not confirmed by evidence. But it is a pattern that the people who investigated him noted and could not explain. The internal affairs investigation that followed the Williams disappearance found approximately 24 instances in which Calkins' statements were found to be untruthful, misleading, or contradictory. In August 2004, Stephen Calkins was fired from the Collier County Sheriff's Office. He was not arrested. He was not charged. He has never faced criminal prosecution in connection with the disappearances of Felipe Santos or Terrance Williams. Subscribe if you want to go deeper on cases like this. New ones every week. The families did not stop. Marcia Williams found attorney Ben Crump, who took on the civil wrongful death suit. Al Sharpton became involved, drawing national attention to what advocates described as a pattern of institutional indifference to missing men of color. Tyler Perry, who saw a television segment about the case and described being shocked and outraged, offered a $100,000 reward for information. He later raised it to $200,000. As of today, that reward has never been collected. In 2019, CNN began a new investigation into the disappearances. 3 reporters spent years on the case, interviewing nearly 70 people, filing dozens of open records requests, obtaining over 10,000 pages of documents, and constructing minute-by-minute timelines of both days from phone records and dispatch logs. They also obtained more than 2,000 incident and arrest reports from Calkin's entire career. The CNN investigation became one of the most detailed pieces of public reporting ever done on the case. It did not produce new evidence sufficient to charge Calkins with a crime. NPR produced an 8-episode podcast called The Last Ride, examining the disappearances and the systemic failures surrounding them. Paramount Plus aired a docu-series called Never Seen Again, narrated and executive produced by Tyler Perry, which included footage from a 2020 civil deposition in which Calkins, older now, his attorney beside him, said repeatedly that he could not remember the details of his encounters with either man. Both men remain missing. No bodies have ever been found. No physical evidence of foul play has ever been publicly confirmed. No one has ever been charged. The civil lawsuit brought by Marsha Williams was ultimately dismissed, not on the merits of the case, but because of a missed filing deadline. A procedural error. 20 years of searching ended at a courthouse door because of a deadline. Stephen Calkins is living in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He has declined interview requests. He has denied wrongdoing. And somewhere in Collier County, Florida, in the canals or the Everglades, or a stretch of swamp that doesn't have a name on any map, 2 men are still waiting to be found. Or they're not there at all, or they walked away. No one knows. That's the part that doesn't close. A deposition tape from 2020. An older man in a conference room, his lawyer beside him, saying he can't remember. The families have been waiting 20 years. At least in Naples, there is a name. There is a face to put to the question. In the middle of 430,000 acres of Central Florida, the next case gives us nothing. Not a suspect, not a motive, not even a body. Just a forest that swallowed someone and didn't give her back. March 10th, 2023. St. Augustine, Florida, a Saturday. Teresa Hartley is 66 years old, and she has spent her entire life in St. Augustine, the oldest city in the country, right on the water, the kind of place that feels permanent and familiar in a way that most of Florida doesn't. Her niece Kara describes her as funny, kind, generous to a fault, always looking out for people. The kind of woman who gives you whatever she has if you need it. Teresa lives with a roommate. She doesn't own much. She has some memory problems, nothing formally diagnosed, nothing that had risen to the level of an official medical finding, but neighbors had noticed. People who knew her had noticed. She sometimes got confused. She sometimes lost track of things. That Saturday morning, Teresa left her St. Johns County home with a male friend. The stated plan was simple and unremarkable. Drive out to the Ocala National Forest, collect some firewood for a bonfire, come home. A Saturday errand. The kind of thing that takes an afternoon. The drive from St. Augustine to the Ocala National Forest takes about an hour. They took a white Dodge pickup truck with a trailer. The friend drove. They headed inland, away from the coast, away from the city, into one of the largest national forests in the eastern United States. Here's what that means in practical terms. Because the geography of this case matters more than almost anything else. The Ocala National Forest covers more than 430,000 acres, roughly 600 square miles of dense Florida scrub, palmetto flats, longleaf pine, cypress strands, sand roads that look passable until they aren't. Cell coverage drops out across large portions of the interior. The trails designated for off-highway vehicles go deep into sections of the forest that are not monitored, not regularly patrolled, and not designed for foot travel. It is beautiful and it is enormous. And if something goes wrong inside it, the margin for error is very thin. Teresa and her companion drove to the Lake Delancey area in the sector near North Forest Road 88, approximately 1 mile south of North Forest Road 66. They were there to collect firewood. According to the companion's account, and this is important to note, his account is the only account, because Teresa has not been found to give one. They pulled off the main road onto an ATV trail to access the wood, and the truck got stuck. Both of them got out. Both of them started walking toward the main road to find help. And then the companion made a decision. He told Teresa to turn around, go back to the truck, wait there. He would continue on, get help, and come back for her. She turned around. He kept walking. He walked until he reached a point where he had cell service. He called his sister. His sister came and picked him up. He did not go back that night. He did not call anyone about Teresa. He did not alert police. He went home. 2 days passed. 2 days later, he returned to retrieve the truck. Teresa was not there. There was no sign of where she had gone. No note. No indication of which direction she had walked, if she had walked at all. The truck was there. Teresa was not. He left again. He still did not immediately report her missing. It was Teresa's roommate who finally called it in. On March 15th, 5 days after Teresa had last been seen. 5 days during which a 66-year-old woman with possible memory problems, no phone, and no identification had been somewhere in or around one of the largest forests in the American Southeast. And no one with official authority had been looking for her. This is where it stops being a bad situation and becomes something that defies easy explanation. Let's stay with the timeline for a moment, because the timeline is where the dread lives. March 10th, Teresa is left at the truck. March 11th, the companion is picked up by his sister. March 12th and 13th, nothing. March 14th, nothing. March 15th, the roommate reports her missing. By the time the Marion County Sheriff's Office opened the case and search teams began mobilizing, Teresa had already been missing for 5 days in terrain that does not forgive 5 days. There's another detail in the police report that sits uncomfortably alongside the rest of the story. At the time, Teresa and her companion were in the forest, according to investigators. Both were reportedly under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Teresa had no phone. She had no identification. She had possible memory impairment. She was 66 years old. She was left alone on an ATV trail in the interior of a 430,000-acre forest, on foot, in the late afternoon, with no way to call for help and no way to tell anyone who she was if someone found her. The search that followed was significant. The Marion County Sheriff's Office took the lead. With Lacucci, regional search and rescue coordinated volunteer efforts. On April 1st and 2nd, more than 3 weeks after Teresa disappeared. Over 300 people gathered at the Ocala OHV trailhead for a grid search of the area. Cadaver dogs were brought in. TVs covered the terrain. Search teams on foot moved through more than 500 acres methodically, looking for any trace. They found nothing. Here's the critical detail. 500 acres is a large search. It is also a fraction of the total forest. Ocala covers 430,000 acres. If Teresa walked, disoriented, possibly impaired, with no landmarks to guide her, she could have gone in any direction. She could have covered ground that seemed impossibly far for a 66-year-old woman in the dark, because fear and confusion and adrenaline don't follow the rules of what seems possible. She could have walked for miles before she stopped. She could have walked in circles. She could have waded into one of the forest's many bodies of water. She could have found a road and taken a ride with someone who had no idea she was missing, who didn't know there was a search, who drove her somewhere else entirely. On March 21st, a possible sighting was reported on the Putnam County side of the forest, the opposite side from where she disappeared miles away. It was never confirmed. The person seen was never definitively identified as Teresa. Law enforcement stated publicly that foul play was not suspected. This is worth noting not because it resolves anything, but because of what it leaves open. Not suspected is not the same as ruled out. It means we have no evidence pointing toward a specific person having harmed her. It does not mean we know what happened to her. But here's what doesn't make sense. And it's the question that her family and anyone who has followed this case cannot move past. Why did the companion wait 2 days to go back? His explanation, as reported to investigators, was that he assumed Teresa had gotten a ride home on her own. He thought she'd figured it out. He went back for the truck, not for her. And when the truck was there and she wasn't, he took the truck and left. Samuel Matichak, the chief of Withlacoochee Regional Search and Rescue, said it plainly. 2 days passed before anyone returned to the place where Teresa was last seen. 2 days in a Florida forest in March, with no water, no shelter, no phone, possible impairment, possible cognitive confusion. Whatever chance existed to find Teresa quickly, whatever small window there was when she might have been close, might have been moving toward a road, might have been findable. That window closed while the companion was at home. Cara Hartley, Teresa's niece, told reporters what she hoped had happened. That Teresa had gotten disoriented, wandered toward a road, been picked up by a good-hearted stranger who didn't know she was missing, and was somewhere safe, confused about who she was and where she lived, being cared for by someone who just hadn't connected her to the search yet. It's the version of events that keeps hope alive. It's the version that doesn't require anyone to have done anything terrible. As of 2025, Teresa Hartley has not been found. The case remains open. The forest hasn't given anything back. North Forest Road 88 on a quiet afternoon. The truck is gone now. The cadaver dogs found nothing. The search teams found nothing. The trail ends at an ATV track in the scrub. And after that, there is only the forest, dense, enormous, indifferent, going on in every direction for as far as you can see. Teresa walked into the woods. The next one never even made it out of a parking lot. Palm Bay, Florida, September 11th, 2000. It's a quiet residential apartment complex in Brevard County, about an hour south of Orlando on the Atlantic coast side of the state. Not a place that makes the news much. Not the kind of neighborhood that shows up in travel guides or true crime documentaries. Just a block of apartment buildings in a mid-sized Florida city. The kind of place where people live because it's affordable and the schools are decent and the parking is fine. Ordinary in every measurable way. Zachary Bernhardt is 8 years old. He lives in the apartment with his mother, Leah Hackett. He is a child. That's the totality of what the public record gives us about who he was at 8 years old. Because the cases that involve children and offer almost nothing in the way of confirmed detail are the hardest to reconstruct without crossing into territory that isn't documented. What we know is that he was 8. He was there. And then he wasn't. Leah Hackett told investigators she suffered from insomnia. On the nights it got bad, she developed a routine. She would leave the apartment while Zachary was asleep and go for a walk, sometimes swim in the complex pool, sometimes just move around the neighborhood until the restlessness passed. She estimated she was typically gone between 15 minutes and 2 hours. She did this regularly. Zachary was sleeping when she left. That was September 11th, 2000. When she returned, Zachary was gone. There were no signs of forced entry documented in the initial police reports. At least, not in the way that gets reported in public-facing accounts of the case. The apartment was not ransacked. There was no broken window, no obvious evidence of a violent struggle at the point of entry. An 8-year-old boy was simply no longer in the apartment where his mother had left him sleeping. This is where it stops being a missing child report and becomes something that has no clean answer. The Bradford County investigation moved quickly in the early days. The way investigations involving missing children tend to move. Tips came in. Neighbors were interviewed. The complex was canvassed. Zachary's face went on flyers and into the missing persons databases. But the leads were thin, and the thin ones had a way of collapsing before they led anywhere solid. Then, in 2001, something happened that seemed like it might break the case open. A neighbor named Kevin Yalbert, a man who lived in close proximity to the Bernhardt apartment, reportedly told a friend that he was a serial killer. Not as a confession to a specific crime, not as a statement made to law enforcement, but as something said to someone he apparently trusted, in the way people sometimes say things that later become the most important words in an investigation. According to what was reported, Yalbert claimed to have abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered children. Plural. Here's the critical detail. His story changed multiple times. The account he gave to his friend, whatever its original shape, shifted when investigators began pressing. The details moved. The specifics that would have anchored the confession to a verifiable crime didn't hold. And crucially, no physical evidence was ever found connecting Kevin Yalbert to Zachary Bernhardt's disappearance. No forensic material, no witnesses, no location, no remains. Yalbert was investigated. He was not charged. Whatever he said to his friend, it was not enough to prosecute, and it has never been independently verified. But here's what doesn't make sense about leaving it there. The claim involved multiple children. If Yalbert was telling the truth, even a distorted, self-aggrandizing version of the truth, then there was more than Zachary at stake. And if he was lying, if he constructed the entire thing for reasons that have never been explained, then why? What does a person gain from confessing to crimes they didn't commit? Neither answer is comfortable. Neither answer closes anything. And then, in the same year, something even stranger surfaced. A Polaroid photograph was found in a parking lot. The photograph showed a young boy. The boy was bound. The boy was gagged. And the boy, according to the people who examined it, who compared it to photographs of Zachary Bernhardt, looked like him. Authorities analyzed the photograph. They could not make a positive identification. The image quality, the angle, the framing, none of it was sufficient to confirm definitively that the child in the photograph was or was not Zachary. The photograph was a lead. It was also a dead end, because a lead you cannot confirm is just a piece of paper with something terrible on it, generating more questions than it answers. Where did the photograph come from? Who left it in a parking lot? Was it connected to Zachary's disappearance? Or was it connected to something else entirely? Some other horror with no relationship to the case at all? These questions were investigated. They were not resolved. Now this is where the case turns dark in a different way than the others. Not through a single impossible gap in a timeline, not through a suspect who kept his job and moved to Iowa, but through an accumulation of unanswerable things that sit on top of each other like sediment. A mother with insomnia and a nighttime routine. A child who vanished from a locked apartment with no forced entry. A neighbor who may or may not have confessed to something. A Polaroid in a parking lot that may or may not show the missing boy. Each piece of this case is a question. None of them have answers. The investigation has remained open. As of the public record available today, Zachary Bernhardt has not been found. The Polaroid has not been definitively linked to him or definitively ruled out. Kevin Jalbert has not been charged in connection with the case. What happened on the night of September 11th, 2000? And in that apartment in Palm Bay, how an 8-year-old boy disappeared from a sleeping position in a residential building without anyone seeing, without a confirmed point of exit, without a trail, is officially unknown. What is known is this: somewhere between the time Leah Hackett left and the time she returned, Zachary was taken out of the world he was in and moved into one where no one has been able to find him. That's the whole of it. That's all the case has given back in 25 years. A Polaroid in a parking lot. A boy who looks like him. No one can say for certain. Zachary vanished from the land. The next case vanishes on the water and takes everyone with it. December 1988. Miami, Florida. A young woman named Lisa Bishop is 23 years old. And she is the kind of person who goes looking for the world instead of waiting for it to come to her. She's an aspiring investigative journalist, and she has decided that her next story will be written from Haiti, a piece contrasting poverty and economic disparity. The kind of story that requires you to get on a boat and go somewhere most people wouldn't think to go. She boards the freighter Freedon in Miami. The vessel is bound for Haiti. The route takes it out of the harbor, southeast through the Florida Straits, into the Caribbean. It is a cargo run with a crew, a schedule, and a documented departure from a documented port. These are not the conditions under which things simply disappear. Before she boards, Lisa meets a man named Florian Meyer-Borch, a German national living and working in Miami at the time. He invites her to make the trip with him. She accepts. She boards the Freedon. The ship leaves Miami. The last radio contact from the Freedon was routine. No distress call, no indication of mechanical failure, no reported weather emergency. The communication that came through gave no signal that anything was wrong. And then the ship went silent. And then it didn't arrive. The Freedon and everyone aboard it, Lisa Bishop, Florian Meyer-Borch, the crew, simply ceased to exist in any traceable way. No debris field was recovered. No bodies were found. No wreckage was located. No survivors surfaced. Searches of the water in the relevant passage turned up nothing that could be confirmed as connected to the vessel. Here's the critical detail. A ship large enough to operate on a scheduled cargo route between Miami and Haiti requires regular radio contact. The maritime communication protocols exist specifically so that vessels in distress can be located and assisted. The Freedom made its routine check-in, and then it was as if it had never been on the water at all. The theories investigators and the family explored were the ones you'd expect. Piracy in the Caribbean corridor, which was documented and active in that era. A catastrophic mechanical failure that sank the vessel too quickly for a distress signal to be sent. Foul play among the people already aboard. None of these theories have ever been confirmed. None have been ruled out. The case remains cold. Lisa Bishop left Miami in December 1988 to tell the world's story. The world never heard from her again. The last radio check-in was routine. Then the sea closed over everything. Lisa disappeared before she could tell anyone what she'd found. The next person disappeared while the world mostly looked away, moving through Florida on a circuit that leaves almost no trace. The kind of disappearance that the system was never really built to find. There is a category of disappearance that the system handles worst. Not the college student who vanishes from a well-lit campus street. Not the child taken from a residential building. Not the woman whose face ends up on a national reward poster. The category the system handles worst is this one. A person living on the margins, moving between motels, paying cash, staying in contact with family just often enough that the silence, when it comes, takes a while to register as permanent. Crystal Reisinger fell into that category. And Florida was part of her story in ways that have never been fully untangled from the rest of it. Crystal was in her late 20s. She was a mother. She had a young child. And by the accounts of people who knew her and loved her, she was funny and warm and the kind of person who could make a room feel easier just by being in it. She also struggled. Addiction had pulled her into a transient orbit that made her difficult to track and, when she went missing, difficult to find. She moved. She paid cash. She used motels and short-term arrangements. She stayed in contact with her family in the irregular, unpredictable rhythm of someone whose life doesn't have fixed coordinates. The Florida thread of Crystal's story connects to the Sebring area and surrounding parts of central Florida, a region of the state that sits in that inland stretch below Orlando, where the tourism infrastructure falls away and the landscape goes flat and scrubby and largely unremarkable. It is not a place that generates a lot of national attention. It is not a place where a missing woman tends to make the evening news. By mid-2016, Crystal's family had lost contact with her. This happened sometimes. The rhythm of her life meant gaps in communication weren't automatically alarming. But the gaps stretched. Days became weeks. Calls went unanswered. The silence accumulated into something that couldn't be explained away by the normal irregularity of her situation. And when the family began pushing for answers, they found that the trail, to whatever extent a trail existed, had already gone cold. Here's the critical detail about cases like Crystal's, and it is not a comfortable one. The infrastructure for finding missing people is not neutral. It responds faster to some disappearances than others. It mobilizes more resources for some profiles than others. A young woman living transiently, struggling with addiction, without a fixed address and without a powerful institutional advocate. Her missing persons report does not generate the same urgency as others. This is documented. This is not a theory. It is a pattern that researchers, advocates, and journalists have written about extensively. And Crystal Reisinger's case sits squarely inside it. The broader investigation into what happened to Crystal developed most significantly around Colorado, where she also had connections and where multiple individuals were later charged with crimes related to her case. That thread received more media attention than the Florida portion of her story, which remained largely unexplored in public reporting. What happened specifically in Florida? What Crystal's movements were, who she was with, what the last confirmed interactions in this state actually looked like, is, for the purposes of what can be responsibly stated here, either disputed or unknown. What her family knows is that she had a child who needed her, that she made contact when she could, that the last message came and then no message came after it. A phone that rang and stopped ringing because it had been turned off or lost or taken. And the silence on the other end became the only answer the family received. Now this is where the case turns dark in the way that quiet cases always do, not with a single dramatic revelation, but with the slow recognition that the search has limits, and that those limits were partly constructed by indifference. Crystal's case is active. As of the available public record, she has not been found. The family has not stopped. The Colorado investigation produced charges, but those charges did not produce Crystal. The Florida portion of her story remains, in large part, a blank. There is no chilling object left behind in this case. No camera in a ditch 250 miles away. No Polaroid in a parking lot. No deposition tape. Just a mother's absence in a child's life, and a phone that went quiet one day and never rang back. Crystal disappeared from the roads of Florida. The next man disappeared from its water, and the sea gave back nothing. The Florida Keys are a chain of islands connected by a single road, US 1, the overseas highway, running southwest from the mainland for about 113 miles until it ends at Key West, the southernmost point in the continental United States. On either side of that road, the water takes over. The Atlantic to the east, the Gulf of Mexico to the west, and in between the shallow, current-driven flats that draw fishermen from across the country every season. Isla Morada sits about halfway down the chain, in what locals call the sport fishing capital of the world. It is a place built around boats, the docks, the charter operations, the tackle shops, the particular culture of people who know the water and trust it, and understand that the same flats that look calm on a clear morning can shift fast and take something from you if you let your attention slip. 1997. Joseph Bova Jr. goes out on the water near Isla Morada. The specific details of what Joseph Bova Jr. looked like, how old he was, what his life was outside of this story. The public record on this case sits at a medium confidence level, which means those personal details require additional sourcing before they can be stated as confirmed fact. What the record does support is the shape of what happened. A man, a boat, the Florida Keys, and a disappearance that the water did not explain. Here's what the geography of a Keys disappearance means in practical terms. The current systems around the Keys are complex and fast-moving. The Gulf Stream runs close offshore on the Atlantic side, one of the most powerful ocean current systems in the world, capable of moving floating objects and people far from their point of origin in a matter of hours. The flats on the Gulf side are shallow but expansive, with channels and cuts that can take a boat or a body into water that is very difficult to search systematically. The Keys attract enormous maritime traffic. Commercial vessels, recreational boats, charter operations, private watercraft, which means that any debris or evidence that enters the water moves through a busy and constantly churning environment. This is where it stops being about what happened and becomes about what can never be recovered. When a person goes missing from a boat in the Keys, the search window is narrow in a way that land-based searches are not. On land, a person who falls or collapses stays where they fell. Evidence is static. It waits for you. On water, everything moves from the moment it enters the current. The Coast Guard operates on protocols built around this reality. The calculations for search areas factor in drift rates and current direction and elapsed time. And those calculations expand the probable location of a missing person outward at a rate that quickly makes comprehensive searching impossible. The Coast Guard conducted a search for Joseph Bova Jr. The search did not produce him. The case went cold. What is unknown, and must be stated clearly as unknown, is what exactly happened on the water that day. Whether he went overboard, whether he was alone or with someone, what the conditions were. Whether there was a mechanical failure, a medical event, an accident of the kind that happens on boats when the variables align wrong and there's no one there to intervene. The case has not yielded confirmed answers to any of these questions in the public record available for this account. But here's what doesn't make sense in the broadest sense of these Keys disappearances. The water keeps secrets in a way that land doesn't. A forest as large as Ocala at least offers the theoretical possibility that a body, or evidence, or some trace could be found, if enough people look long enough. The ocean offers no such possibility. What the current takes, it takes permanently. The Keys are beautiful, and the fishing is extraordinary, and the light on the water in the morning is something people travel thousands of miles to see. They are also a place where things go into the water and don't come back. A boat rocking in a slip, the engine quiet. Something went wrong out on the water, somewhere between the dock and wherever the current took him. And the water kept the secret the way the water always does. The Keys took Joseph and offered no explanation. The next case doesn't happen on the water. It doesn't happen in a forest. It happens at a kitchen table in a Maryland suburb. And then it runs. And Florida is just the last place anyone confirmed seeing him before he disappeared into a life that shouldn't have been possible to construct, and that he apparently built anyway. There is a specific kind of dread that comes with this case. It is different from the dread of a woman who vanished on a jogging path, or a child who disappeared from a locked apartment, or two men who got into a patrol car and ceased to exist. Those cases ask, what happened to them? This case asks something harder. This case asks, what was he? William Bradford Bishop Jr. was 38 years old in March 1976. By any external measure, he was a success. Yale undergraduate degree, a master's degree from UCLA, a State Department career as a Foreign Service officer, the kind of position that requires security clearances, language proficiency, and a demonstrated ability to represent the United States government in complex international environments. He spoke 5 languages. He had a wife, 3 sons, and a mother who lived with the family. He had a house in Bethesda, Maryland, in a quiet suburban neighborhood of the kind where people mow their lawns on Saturdays and know their neighbors' names. He had also, in the weeks and months before March 1976, been passed over for a promotion at the State Department. Investigators would later learn he had been seeing a psychiatrist. He had been prescribed medication, The external architecture of his life was intact. What was happening underneath it was not. On the evening of March 1st, 1976, William Bradford Bishop Jr. murdered his wife, his mother, and his 3 sons inside their Bethesda home. The details of what happened inside that house are part of the court record and the FBI file, and they do not need to be described here. What matters for this account is what happened after. Because after is where Florida enters the story. Bishop did not stay. He loaded the bodies of his family into the family station wagon, a green Ford Galaxy, drove south, and buried them in a wooded area in North Carolina. Then he kept driving. Here's the critical detail. He didn't run blind. He bought things. He used his credit card, which meant he left a trail. A thin one, but a trail. Gas station receipts placed him moving south through the American Southeast. Camping supplies were purchased. The purchases traced a route that investigators followed with increasing urgency as the days passed, and the full scope of what had happened in Bethesda became clear. The trail led to Florida. Specifically, it led to Citrus County, the Inverness area in the interior of the state, away from the coasts, in a region of old Florida scrubland and cypress swamps that most people drive through without stopping. This is where the documented evidence of William Bradford Bishop Jr.'s location ends. Receipts. A campsite. The green station wagon, eventually found abandoned. And then nothing. The FBI put him on their most wanted list. Interpol issued notices. His photograph went into the systems that existed in 1976 to find fugitives, which were far less comprehensive than what exists today, but were not nothing. Law enforcement agencies across the country and eventually across the world were looking for a Yale-educated, multilingual State Department officer with a specific face and a documented history. They did not find him. Now this is where the case turns dark. Not in the way of a victim's story turning dark, but in the particular, unsettling darkness of a perpetrator who simply refuses to be caught. Because what followed was not silence. What followed was decades of sightings, Europe primarily. Sightings in Switzerland and Sweden, in Italy, countries where Bishop had traveled during his State Department career, countries where he had language skills and cultural familiarity and potentially contacts from his professional life. A man who looked like him, moving through cities in ways that suggested someone who knew how to behave like a local, who didn't stand out, who had apparently constructed an existence that was invisible to the systems designed to detect him. None of the sightings were confirmed. Every lead that seemed close enough to pursue was pursued and came back empty. The man seen in Sorrento was not definitively Bishop. The man seen in Stockholm was not definitively Bishop. The face in the surveillance footage from a European city in the 1990s was studied and compared, and ultimately inconclusive. Here's what doesn't make sense, or rather, what makes a terrible kind of sense that is harder to sit with than a straightforward impossibility. Bishop had skills, real ones. A Foreign Service officer spends years learning how to operate in unfamiliar environments, how to read social contexts, how to present as whatever the situation requires. He spoke the languages of multiple countries where sightings were later reported. He understood bureaucratic systems well enough to have worked inside one of the most complex in the world. If any kind of person could theoretically construct a new identity and sustain it across decades without detection, it was someone with exactly his background. This is a theory. It is labeled as such. It has never been confirmed. He may have died in the Florida wilderness in 1976, in the scrubland around Inverness, before he ever made it out of the state. He may have walked into a swamp and not walked out. The green station wagon was found abandoned, but a car being abandoned does not tell you whether the person who abandoned it walked away or didn't. Florida has terrain that has kept larger secrets than one man. The DNA profiling that became available in later decades was used to try to match Bishop to unidentified remains from the relevant period and geographic area. It did not produce a confirmed match. As of 2025, William Bradford Bishop Jr. remains on the FBI's most wanted fugitives list. He would be 87 years old if he is still alive. Whether he is alive is officially unknown. Think about what that means as a lived reality for anyone connected to this case. The investigators who worked it in 1976 are old or gone. The technology that now exists to find people, facial recognition, DNA databases, digital financial trails, the surveillance infrastructure of the modern world, none of it existed when Bishop disappeared. He got a 50-year head start on all of it. If he found a way to survive the initial flight and establish a new identity before those tools existed, he may simply have been impossible to find by the time the tools were available to look. Or he walked into a Florida swamp in the spring of 1976, and the swamp kept him. Neither answer feels like enough. A man commits an act of catastrophic violence against his own family, the people who lived with him in a Bethesda house on a quiet suburban street. And then he either died in obscurity in a Florida forest, or he lived for decades in a European city, speaking the local language, drinking coffee at sidewalk cafes, watching the world move on without him. Both possibilities are disturbing in ways that don't cancel each other out. They just sit there, unresolved, the way the case itself sits. The receipts end in Citrus County. The green station wagon was found, empty. The forest in that part of Florida goes on for a long distance in every direction. And somewhere in the 50 years since, either the forest took him or he took himself somewhere the forest couldn't reach. A trail of gas station receipts ending in Florida scrub. A green station wagon with no one in it. Everything he was. The Yale degree, the languages, the clearances, the family, the house in Bethesda. Erased or abandoned or destroyed, depending on which version of events is true. And somewhere, maybe, he's still walking. That's the last of the individual cases. 10 people. 10 different corners of Florida. 10 different versions of the same terrible question. What happened? And why doesn't anyone know? Before we answer that question, before we sit with what this state, taken as a whole, does to the people who move through it, there's one more thing to do. We need to go back to the beginning, back to the map, back to the promise we made at the start, when Florida looked like it always does. Bright, open, familiar, the kind of place you think you know, the kind of place 10 people thought they knew too. Go back to the map. Not the one on your phone, the kind you used to unfold on a road trip, the paper kind that never folded back the same way twice. The one that made Florida look like a peninsula you could trace with your finger from top to bottom in about 30 seconds. Start at the top. Run your finger south. Watch the state narrow as you go, squeezing down toward the Keys, the land giving way to water on both sides until there's just a thin strip of islands and then nothing but ocean. Now, put pins in it. Gainesville, in the north-central interior, college town, tree-lined streets, a residential neighborhood where a 20-year-old went for a walk and the walk never ended. Drop the first pin. Miami, specifically Coconut Grove, a bohemian waterfront neighborhood in the southeastern corner of the state. A mile of distance between a girl and her father's gallery, a mile she never covered. Drop the second pin. Naples, on the southwest Gulf Coast. 2 pins close together on the same road corridor because 2 men vanished in the same place with the same deputy, and the map doesn't let you separate them no matter how hard you try. Drop the 3rd and 4th pins. Ocala, in the dead center of the state, a forest so large it has its own internal road system, a white Dodge pickup stuck on an ATV trail, a woman told to wait who apparently didn't stay or couldn't stay or was taken from staying. Drop the 5th pin. Palm Bay, on the Atlantic coast south of Cape Canaveral. An apartment complex, a sleeping child, a mother who came home to find him gone. Drop the 6th pin. Miami Harbor again, a freighter that left on a scheduled cargo run and radioed in as routine and then ceased to exist on the water. Drop the 7th pin. Central Florida, the Sebring Corridor, the inland stretch where the tourist infrastructure falls away and the roads go quiet. A woman moving through a system that wasn't built to find her, a phone that went silent and stayed silent. Drop the 8th pin. Isla Mirada, in the middle of the Florida Keys, open water, a boat, the current systems of the Atlantic and the Gulf meeting in the channels around a chain of islands, a man who went out and didn't come back. Drop the 9th pin. Inverness, Citrus County, in the interior west of the state, the last confirmed location of a wanted man. Gas station receipts and a campsite and a green station wagon found empty, and then 50 years of nothing. Drop the 10th pin. 10 pins, 1 state. And the map just sits there looking like Florida always looks, that flat peninsula, that familiar shape. Those names you recognize from road trips and hurricane coverage and orange juice commercials. It doesn't look like what it is. It never does. Here's what these 10 cases have in common. And it is not the thing that makes for a tidy conclusion, because there is no tidy conclusion. What they share is not a single killer, not a single location, not a pattern that law enforcement identified and interrupted. What they share is the gap. Every single one of these cases has a gap, a specific moment or period in which the person was present and then was not, and in which no confirmed evidence exists to explain the transition. Tiffany Sessions, between her apartment door and the end of her block. Amy Billig, between the corner of Poinciana and Main Highway, and her father's gallery 1 mile away. Felipe Santos and Terrance Williams, between the back of a patrol car and a Circle K that no one can confirm they ever reached. Teresa Hartley, between a stuck truck on North Forest Road 88 and wherever a 430,000-acre forest eventually ends. Zachary Bernhardt, between a sleeping child and an empty apartment. Lisa Bishop, between a routine radio check-in and the coast of Haiti. Crystal Reisinger, between a phone call and silence. Joseph Bova Jr., between the dock and the water. William Bradford Bishop Jr., between a campsite in Citrus County and the rest of the world. The gaps are different sizes. Some last seconds, some last decades. But every case has one. A seam in the record where the person crosses from documented to gone, and the seam doesn't close. Now, this is where the larger picture turns dark. Not just the individual cases, but the state itself as a backdrop for disappearance. Florida is, in certain structural ways, designed to make people hard to find, not by intention, not by conspiracy, but by the accumulated features of what it is. It is a transient state. People move through Florida, snowbirds, migrant workers, tourists, retirees relocating from the north, young people chasing opportunity, people running from something, people running towards something. in volumes that make the population feel permanent from the outside, but is in fact in constant flux. This matters because disappearance is easier to sustain in a place where people are always arriving and always leaving. The absence of someone who was supposed to stay is harder to notice in a state where departure is the default mode. It has terrain that swallows evidence. The Everglades alone cover approximately 1.5 million acres of subtropical wilderness in the southern part of the state. Sawgrass prairie, mangrove forests, tidal channels, alligator habitat, water that is rarely deep but is always present and always moving. Beyond the Everglades, Ocala's 430,000 acres of scrub, the cypress swamps of the Big Cypress National Preserve, the mangrove coastlines that run for hundreds of miles along both the Gulf and Atlantic sides. The water. Always the water. Offshore currents, inland waterways, the Keys tidal systems, the rivers that run through the interior and empty into both coasts. Florida does not preserve evidence. It dissolves it, submerges it, moves it, covers it in vegetation that grows fast in the subtropical heat. It has a history of institutional gaps. The cases of Felipe Santos and Terrance Williams exist in part because men of color going missing from the same officer's patrol car didn't generate a national media response for years. Crystal Reisinger's case exists in part because a transient woman struggling with addiction doesn't activate the same institutional urgency as other profiles. The FBI's largest Florida search was for Tiffany sessions. But even the largest search in the state's history, found nothing. The machinery works imperfectly. It always has. And it has geography that both attracts and conceals. The state is a peninsula. You can only leave it in a few directions, which should theoretically make it easier to contain a search. But that same peninsular geography means that if you go into the interior, into the forest, into the water, you have an enormous amount of space in which to disappear before you reach any of those boundaries. The funnel that should catch you is also a container that holds you away from the people looking. None of this is comfort. None of this explains Tiffany's Walkman or Amy's camera in the grass off the turnpike, or the silence on the other end of Marsha Williams' phone when she realized her son had last been seen in a patrol car. It doesn't explain a Polaroid in a parking lot or a routine radio check-in that was the last sound a ship ever made. It doesn't explain a 66-year-old woman standing beside a stuck truck in the Florida scrub, told to wait, waiting, and then gone. What it does is give you a frame for why the map looks the way it looks, why there are 10 pins instead of 1, why Florida specifically, why this state, why these places that look so familiar from the highway and the tourist brochure and the window of the plane coming into land. Because familiarity is not safety. That's the thing. That's what every one of these cases is trying to tell you. Tiffany Sessions knew her neighborhood. She'd walked that route before. Amy Billig hitchhiked through Coconut Grove regularly. It was her neighborhood, her community, the place her family had chosen specifically because it felt safe. Felipe Santos was on a road he traveled for work. Terrance Williams left his house on an ordinary Monday morning. Teresa Hartley was on a day trip with a friend to collect firewood. Zachary Bernhardt was asleep in his own apartment. Joseph Bova Jr. was on water he presumably knew. Familiar places, ordinary days. And then the gap. Florida is full of gaps. It always has been. The water and the forest and the highways and the swamps. They've been keeping secrets since before the first road was built through them. And they will keep secrets long after the last pin on this map is forgotten. But the families don't forget. That's the part that doesn't dissolve in the heat or drift away in the current. Susan Billig searched for 31 years. Hillary Sessions advocates for her daughter decades after the trail went cold. Marcia Williams sits in an apartment surrounded by her son's possessions and waits for an answer that has not come in 20 years. Teresa Hartley runs a Facebook page and asks anyone who knows anything to do the right thing. A child Crystal Risinger loved is growing up without her. The map is just paper. The pins are just markers. The people are real. There's a question that runs underneath all 10 of these cases, and it doesn't have a clean answer, but it needs to be asked anyway. Why doesn't anyone know? Not in the philosophical sense, not as a rhetorical gesture toward mystery. In the practical, granular case file sense, why, given everything that was done? The FBI searches, the reward money, the volunteer grid teams, the CNN investigations, the podcasts, the docuseries, the decades of tips. Why do we still not know what happened to these people? Why does the map still have 10 unanswered pins instead of 10 closed cases? Part of the answer is the terrain, which we've already walked through. Part of it is institutional, the failures and gaps and indifferences that allowed some of these cases to go cold before they were ever truly hot. But there's a third part, and it's the one that sits most uncomfortably, because it's about something that doesn't have a fix. Some things simply don't leave enough behind. A 17-year-old girl steps off a curb in Coconut Grove on a Tuesday afternoon, and 50 years later, her brother sits in a garden nearby, and there is nothing. No body, no confirmed perpetrator, no final answer. Just a remembrance bench in the park where she was going to have lunch. A 20-year-old leaves her apartment with her Walkman and her Rolex and no keys because she was coming back. And 35 years later, the FBI has a suspect who died with the answer. A freighter makes its last radio contact in the Florida Straits, and the ocean keeps it absolutely, completely, without returning a single piece of evidence large enough to be meaningful. A man drives a green station wagon into Citrus County and either dies there or doesn't. And the forest and the swamp and the 50 years since have made the distinction between those two possibilities essentially unverifiable. This is what cold cases actually are, underneath the true crime infrastructure that has grown up around them. They are not puzzles with missing pieces that will eventually be found. Some of them are situations in which the evidence no longer exists, or never existed in a form that could survive the environment it entered, or was destroyed or moved or covered before anyone knew to look for it. The gap in the record isn't always a gap that can be closed. Sometimes the gap is permanent. That's the hardest thing to hold. Harder than the injustice, though the injustice is real. Harder than the institutional failures, though those are real too. The hardest thing is the possibility that for some of these families, the answer is not coming. Not because no one is looking, not because no one cares, but because the answer went somewhere the looking can't reach. And yet, here's what doesn't make sense about accepting that framing entirely. And this is important, because the cases that have broken open after decades of silence are not rare anomalies. They happen. DNA technology has identified killers from evidence collected 40 years ago. Cold case units have reopened files and found new witnesses who had been too afraid to speak and are no longer afraid. Digital records that didn't exist in 1974 or 1989 or 2000 now cover the world in a layer of data that can sometimes be retroactively applied to old questions. Paul Eugene Rolls' address book sat in evidence for years before investigators understood what they were looking at. The notation number 2, February 9th, 89, was always there. It just had to be read correctly. This matters because several of these cases are not fully cold. Teresa Hartley disappeared in 2023, 2 years ago. Her case is active. The forest hasn't finished being searched. The sighting on the Putnam County side was never confirmed or definitively ruled out, which means there is still a direction for investigators to look. Zachary Bernhardt's case remains open. The Polaroid was never definitively excluded. Kevin Jalbert's claimed confession has never been satisfactorily resolved in either direction. The Santos and Williams cases are the subject of ongoing advocacy, and the involvement of a federal civil rights investigation is not a door that has been permanently closed. Some of these gaps can still close. The question is whether they will. Now this is where the case, not any single case, but all 10 of them taken together, turns into something larger than a list of unsolved disappearances. Because the thing that connects Gainesville in 1989 to Coconut Grove in 1974 to Naples in 2003 to Ocala in 2023 is not a single perpetrator or a single pattern of crime. It's something quieter and more durable than that. It's the specific vulnerability of an ordinary day in a familiar place. Every person on this map was living a normal life right up to the moment they weren't. Tiffany Sessions wasn't doing anything unusual. She was going for a walk she'd done before, on a route she knew, in her own neighborhood. Amy Billig was hitchhiking a mile through the community her family had chosen specifically for its warmth and safety. Felipe Santos was on a road he used for work. Terrance Williams told his mother he'd see her later. Teresa Hartley was on a Saturday day trip. Zachary Bernhardt was asleep. Lisa Bishop was pursuing the kind of story that young journalists pursue when they want to matter. Crystal Reisinger was making the call she could, staying in contact the way her life allowed. Joseph Bova Jr. went out on the water the way people go out on the water in the Keys. Because it's what you do there. Because it's familiar. Because it's safe until it isn't. William Bradford Bishop Jr. drove south on American roads that looked like roads any American might drive. None of them were doing the thing you warn people not to do. None of them were in the place you warn people not to go. They were just in Florida on ordinary days, in places they thought they knew. And here's the thing about familiar places. The thing that this map, with its 10 pins, makes unavoidably clear. Familiarity is a feeling. It is not a fact. The neighborhood you've walked 100 times is also the neighborhood where something can happen on the 101st time that changes everything. The road you drive to work is also the road where a patrol car can pull you over and nothing can be logged and no one comes looking fast enough. The forest you visited before is also 430,000 acres of terrain that does not care how many times you've been there before. That will not make an exception for you. That is exactly as indifferent to your survival on your worst day as it was friendly on your best one. The water. The same water that makes Florida what it is. The reason people move there, the reason people visit, the reason the state exists as a cultural idea at all, is the same water that closed over a freighter without leaving a trace, that took a man from his boat in the Keys and distributed the evidence of that taking across current systems too large and too fast to search comprehensively. The water is beautiful, and the water is permanent, and the water doesn't give things back. Florida is the 4th most populous state in the country. Tens of millions of people live there, and the overwhelming majority of them go about their ordinary days and come home, and the map of their lives has no pin dropped on it. The odds, taken as statistics, are fine. The odds are not the point. The point is that the gap exists. In every life, on every ordinary day, in every familiar place, the gap exists. The seam between documented and gone. The moment between being present and being a name on a missing persons report. Most people never fall into it. These 10 people did. And the reasons why, the specific, granular, case file reasons, are mostly either unknown or unproven or insufficient to produce the accountability that the families deserve. Tiffany Sessions' mother wrote a book called Where's My Tiffany? She spent the rest of her life looking for the answer to that question and did not find it. Amy Billig's mother, Susan, spent 31 years looking and died still looking. Marcia Williams has been looking for 20 years, and the civil suit that might have produced some accounting was dismissed on a filing deadline. Teresa Hartley runs a Facebook page and asks people to do the right thing. A family somewhere is still waiting for a phone to ring. The map is full. The cases are not closed. The families are still there. In Florida, the sun-bleached highways, the Spanish moss over the state roads, the forest ATV trails vanishing into the scrub pine, the strip mall parking lots going amber in the late afternoon. Florida just goes on, the way it always has, the way it will, looking exactly like a place you know, looking exactly like a place where nothing like this could happen, looking exactly like it always looks. Let's go back through them one more time. Not quickly, not as a recap, as a reckoning. Because there's something that happens when you line these cases up next to each other. When you take them out of their individual contexts and hold them all in the same frame at once. Each case, on its own, is a tragedy with a specific shape, a specific geography, a specific person, a specific gap in the record. But when you put all 10 of them together on the same map, something else comes into focus. Something about what gets found and what doesn't. Something about who gets looked for and how hard and for how long and with what resources and by whom. Start with what was found. In none of these 10 cases was the missing person located. Not one. Tiffany Sessions, not found. Amy Billig, not found. Felipe Santos, not found. Terrance Williams, not found. Teresa Hartley, not found. Zachary Bernhardt, not found. Lisa Bishop, not found. Crystal Riesinger, not found. Joseph Bova Jr., not found. William Bradford Bishop Jr., not found, and in his case, not found means something categorically different. It means a man who committed an act of catastrophic violence against his own family has existed in a state of unresolved legal limbo for nearly 50 years. Either dead somewhere and no one has looked, or alive in a way no one has been able to prove. 10 people. 0 located. In a state with one of the most developed law enforcement infrastructures in the country, with FBI field offices in Coast Guard sectors, and a state-level missing persons database, and, in several of these cases, national media attention and significant reward money. 0 located. That number sits differently depending on which of these cases you've been thinking about most. For Tiffany Sessions, it sits as an indictment of what died with Paul Eugene Rolls, a man who apparently kept an address book of his victims, who noted the date of her disappearance alongside the number 2, who worked a job near her route on the day she vanished and didn't show up for it, and who died in 2013 without ever being charged, without ever being forced to tell investigators where she was. The largest search in Florida history, and the answer may have been in a dead man's handwriting the whole time. A notation in a book, a number, a date. Not enough to convict in court, but enough to know investigators say enough to know, and knowing without being able to prove is one of the specific cruelties that cold cases inflict on the people who have to carry them. For Amy Billig, it sits as something longer and stranger and more corrosive. 50 years. Two parents who dedicated the remainder of their lives to a search that never produced their daughter. A brother who built a bench in a park because there was nothing else to build. No grave to visit. No place where she definitively was. A phone that rang for 20 years with the voice of a man who claimed to have her, who turned out to be a federal agent with an obsessive disorder and a proximity to the case that has never been fully explained. A camera in the grass off the Florida Turnpike at 250 miles from home with one photograph on the roll, a truck in front of a wall that was never identified. 50 years of searching, and the closest thing to an answer is a theory about a motorcycle gang that no one has ever been able to prove. For Felipe Santos and Terrance Williams, it sits as something institutional. It sits as a question about what the system is for and who it protects. Two men of color in Collier County, Florida, last seen in the patrol car of a white deputy who was fired for lying and never charged with a crime. A civil lawsuit dismissed on a filing deadline. A $200,000 reward that has gone uncollected for 20 years. A deposition tape from 2020 in which the former deputy says he cannot remember, in which his attorney sits beside him, and the families wait outside the frame of the camera, and the answer, if there is an answer, stays locked inside a man who has declined every invitation to give it. For Teresa Hartley, it sits as something recent and raw. 2023, not history. Not a case that has passed into the amber of the cold case archive. A woman who is missing right now, as of the time this is being written, in a forest that 300 volunteers searched and could not find her in. A companion who waited 2 days to go back. A phone she didn't have. An identification she didn't have. A memory that may have been failing. All the worst variables aligned on the same Saturday in March, and the forest kept her. And as of 2025, the forest has not let her go. For Zachary Bernhardt, it sits as the particular weight of a child. 8 years old. The cases involving children are the ones that lodge differently. Not because the other cases matter less, but because 8 years old means a life that had barely started, a person who had almost no agency in any of it, who was where he was because that was where his life had put him, and who needed someone to protect him, and the protection failed. Whether it failed through negligence or through the action of a specific person who has never been charged. That question has been open for 25 years. For Lisa Bishop, it sits as the particular silence of the ocean. She wanted to tell a story. She got on a boat to go tell it. The ocean took the boat and the story and her, and offered nothing back. No wreckage, no debris, no final communication, no remains. In an era before satellite tracking and modern maritime monitoring, a vessel could simply cease to exist on the water, and the water would give you nothing to work with. Lisa Bishop was 23 years old, and the sea closed over her as completely as if she had never been there. For Crystal Reisinger, it sits as the injustice of invisibility. Not a dramatic injustice with a face and a name. Not a specific deputy who was fired. Not a specific suspect who died with a notebook. The quieter injustice of a system that simply did not move as fast or as hard for a transient woman struggling with addiction as it would have moved for someone else. That injustice doesn't have a villain to name. It has a structure, and structures are harder to hold accountable than individuals. For Joseph Bova Jr., it sits as the indifference of natural systems. The current doesn't know his name. The tide doesn't distinguish between the things it moves and the things it should leave alone. The water around the Florida Keys is among the most beautiful water in the world, and it is entirely, absolutely, permanently indifferent to the people who go out on it. Something went wrong on the water in 1997, and the water absorbed it and moved on. For William Bradford Bishop Jr., it sits as the longest unresolved question, the one that time has made stranger rather than simpler. A man who was, by every documented measure, a successful and accomplished member of American society, committed an act that obliterated his family and then disappeared into the American landscape and either died in a Florida swamp or lived for decades in ways that should have been impossible. 87 years old if he's alive. On the most wanted list since 1978. A face that has been circulated across Interpol networks for nearly half a century. And still, nothing confirmed. Still the green station wagon. Still the receipts ending in Citrus County. Still the gap. Here's the critical detail that cuts across all 10 of these cases simultaneously, and it is not a comfortable one. In not a single case on this list did the truth fully emerge. In not a single case did the investigation reach its natural conclusion. A confirmed answer, a charged perpetrator, a located person, a closed file. Every single one of these cases remains, in some essential way, open. Even the cases where investigators believe they know what happened, Tiffany Sessions, where they believe Rolls was responsible. Belief is not proof, and proof is what would have meant something to Hillary Sessions. Belief is what you have when the evidence ran out before the answer did. And so the families carry it. That's the final thing, the thing that doesn't go away when the search teams stand down and the reward posters fade and the news cycle moves on. The families carry the open question the way you carry something that has no proper place to be put down. Hillary Sessions carries it. Marsha Williams carries it. Joshua Billig carries it. Teresa Hartley carries it. The child Crystal Riesinger left behind carries it without even fully knowing yet what it is they're carrying. The gaps in the record are also gaps in lives, real ones. Gaps that have never closed and that shape everything around them, the way a missing person's absence restructures the space of everyone who knew them. Permanently, the way a room rearranges itself around a piece of furniture that was moved and never replaced. That's what 10 pins on a map actually means. Not 10 data points, not 10 cold cases in a database. 10 restructured spaces where someone used to be. 10 people. 10 corners of one state. And the state just goes on the way Florida always goes on. The sun on the highway, the forest closing in around the road, the water on both sides of the peninsula catching the light the way it always does. Beautiful and indifferent, and full of everything it's decided to keep. Come back to the map one last time. Not to add anything to it, not to move the pins. Just to look at it the way you look at something when you've spent enough time with it that it has stopped being abstract and started being real. The way a map stops being a picture of a place and becomes the place itself, with all the weight that carries. Gainesville, Coconut Grove, Naples twice, Ocala, Palm Bay, Miami Harbor, the Sebring Corridor, Islamorada, Inverness. 10 pins, one state, and the state looks exactly as it always has. That's the thing that stays with you. Florida doesn't look different after you know these stories. The sun-bleached highways are still there, running flat and straight through a landscape that seems to go on forever in every direction. The Spanish moss still hangs over the state roads in the northern counties, moving slightly in whatever passes for a breeze. The strip mall parking lots still go amber in the late afternoon. That particular Florida light that makes everything look slightly overexposed, slightly too bright to look at directly. The forest ATV trails still vanish into the scrub pine the way they always have. The trees closing in on both sides until the road is just a gap in the green, and the green is all there is. It looks the same. It looks familiar. It looks like the place you know, or the place you've driven through, or the place your family went on vacation, or the place on the weather map during hurricane season. It looks like that because it is that. Florida is genuinely that place. The beaches and the sunshine and the orange groves and the rocket launches from Cape Canaveral and the Art Deco hotels in South Beach and the manatees in the springs and all of it. All of it is real. All of it is part of what the state actually is. And it is also this. The 10 pins, the 10 gaps, the 10 families still waiting. Both things are true at the same time. That's not a contradiction. That's just what places are. Accumulations of everything that has ever happened in them. The beautiful and the terrible sitting in the same geography, sharing the same roads, lit by the same sun. The corner of Poinciana Street and Main Highway in Coconut Grove is where Amy Billig was last seen by construction workers on a Tuesday afternoon in 1974. And it is also just a corner in Miami where people stop at the light and turn and go about their days without knowing. Southwest 35th Place in Gainesville is where Tiffany Sessions walked out of her apartment building with a Walkman and never came back. And it is also just a residential street where people park and mow and carry groceries and have no particular reason to think about what happened there in February 1989. North Forest Road, 88 in Ocala, is where Teresa Hartley was left beside a stuck truck and told to wait. And it is also just a forest road that OHV riders use on weekends without knowing what the road has been part of. Places don't announce themselves. They don't come with warnings printed along the edges of the map. The dangerous corner looks like every other corner. The road where the patrol car pulled over 2 men who were never seen again looks like every other road in North Naples on a weekday morning. This is the thing that these 10 cases, taken together, are telling you. Not as a lesson with a moral attached, not as a safety briefing, but as a plain statement of what the record shows. The gap between ordinary and gone is not located somewhere you can see and avoid. It doesn't announce itself. It is present in the familiar places, on the ordinary days, in the middle of the routes you've driven before, in the neighborhoods you think you know, and the forests you visited, and the waters you fished. It is present everywhere, and it opens rarely. Most people never fall into it. These 10 people fell into it. Now think about what that means for the families. Not abstractly, specifically. Hillary Sessions, who wrote a book called Where's My Tiffany? And spent years advocating for her daughter, living with the particular torment of a case where investigators believe they know what happened but cannot prove it. Where the man they believe was responsible died in 2013 and took the answer with him. What does it mean to carry that? To know. Or to believe you know, which is its own kind of knowing. And to have no recourse, no confirmation, no grave to visit, no final chapter. Susan Billig, who died in 2005, still searching. Who tracked bikers across the country and traveled to England and sat by a phone that rang for 20 years with cruelty instead of answers. Who asked her son Joshua never to stop looking. Joshua, who built a bench in Peacock Park, the park where Amy was going to meet her friends for lunch on March 5th, 1974, the lunch she never made it to. And who carries the open question of his sister's disappearance the way you carry something that has no weight until you try to put it down and find that you can't. Marsha Williams, who sits in an apartment in Naples surrounded by her son Terrance's possessions. The things he left behind when he drove away in his white Cadillac on January 12, 2004, and said he'd see her later. 20 years of possessions in a corner of a dining room. 20 years of a civil lawsuit that ended on a filing deadline. 20 years of a $200,000 reward that nobody claimed. 20 years of a former deputy living in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, declining interview requests, saying he can't remember. Teresa Hartley, who runs a Facebook page called Find Teresa Hartley and asks anyone with information to do the right thing, whose aunt walked into the Ocala National Forest on a Saturday in March 2023 and has not come back, whose case is 2 years old, which in the context of this list makes it almost new. Almost fresh enough that the search teams haven't fully given up, based almost recent enough that the sighting on the Putnam County side of the forest might still mean something, almost close enough that the answer might still be findable if the right person looks in the right place. Almost. That word does a lot of work in missing persons cases. It is the word that keeps families going, and the word that keeps investigators from fully closing files, and the word that sits at the center of every cold case that isn't quite cold enough to stop hurting. And the child Crystal Reisinger left behind. Growing up now, older than they were when the phone went quiet. Old enough perhaps to start asking the questions that children of missing parents eventually ask. The questions that don't have good answers. Where did she go? Why hasn't she come back? What happened on the road, in the motel, in the corridor of a state that doesn't keep careful track of people moving through its margins? There is no closure here. There is not supposed to be. Closure is the thing that true crime sometimes promises. The reveal, the answer, the case solved in the final act. But these are not stories with final acts. They are ongoing situations. They are lives restructured around absences that have not been explained. Families organized around missing centers. Investigations that are open or dormant or cold but not finished. Tiffany Sessions is still missing. Amy Billig is still missing. Felipe Santos is still missing. Terrance Williams is still missing. Teresa Hartley is still missing. Zachary Bernhardt is still missing. Lisa Bishop is still missing. Crystal Reisinger is still missing. Joseph Bova Jr. is still missing. William Bradford Bishop Jr. is still either missing or dead. And after 50 years, the distinction has become almost philosophical. 10 people. 10 different corners of the Sunshine State. If you know something, anything, about any of these cases, the tip lines are still open. The Alachua County Sheriff's Department and FDLE for Tiffany Sessions, where the Sessions family maintains an active $25,000 reward. The Miami Police Department for Amy Billig, case number 406906, the Collier County Sheriff's Office for Felipe Santos and Terrance Williams, where public records remain available. The Marion County Sheriff's Office for Teresa Hartley, where the search has never been officially closed. The Brevard County Sheriff's Office for Zachary Bernhardt. Interpol and the FBI for William Bradford Bishop Jr., whose most wanted listing remains active. The map is full. The cases are open. The families are still there. Go back to what Florida looked like at the beginning of this. The sun on the highway, the moss on the state roads, the forest trails, the parking lots at dusk, the water on both sides of the peninsula carrying the light. The places you've driven past 100 times. The kind of place you think you know. 10 people thought they knew it too.